Hope you're enjoying the snowy weather wherever you are and are nice and warm and healthy. Thank you for joining us for our cybersecurity peer group event, Internet of Things Security. And we have Tony Corado, the CTO, and Brian Rashap, an IoT professor from CNM Fuse Makerspace or CNM Ingenuity. I'll let them tell you a little bit more about themselves. And welcome to the NMTC Cybersecurity peer group meeting. Hopefully, as many of you know, and if you don't, the NMTC is a member-led organization committed to supporting the state's vibrant tech ecosystem through intentional networking, programming, targeted promotion, public policy advocacy, and more. So we're getting ready to look at the broadband initiatives that the legislature will be looking at. We have monthly peer group meetings, including cybersecurity, data science, women in technology, and 3D printing. Our signature events are our Experience IT conference, which we just had in November. It was a fantastic program. If you're interested, you can still see the outline on our website. And then our Women in Technology Awards, which is it has typically been in the spring. It'll probably be in the late spring. Last year, we were getting ready to have it about a week before COVID hit. So we ended up having it in the summer, but it's a great event where we highlight women doing outstanding work in the STEM fields, and whether it's at Sandia, New Mexico Tech as a professor in STEM education, all sorts of various opportunities in various fields. But our nomination process is open currently. So I'll put that in the chat box, or maybe I'll ask Ava to do that, to put that in the chat, our Women in Technology nomination. So please nominate someone you know who's doing outstanding work. And this is our 13th annual event. So we're really excited. It's grown every year. As I mentioned, public policy, we work on during the legislative session, things like broadband initiatives, initiatives for Sandia and Los Alamos, their tech readiness program, supporting various economic development programs that are important to all of our small businesses, all of our businesses of various sizes. And so we're looking forward to working on that. There was an article in the paper just 2 days ago that the outlook doesn't look quite as terrible as they were expecting. So looks pretty good. So that'll be good for the state. And then of course, we're a membership organization. And so we do membership promotion and features and really act as a conduit for many of our members and for CIOs to bring people together to help provide resources and make those connections. So if you're interested in membership with the Tech Council, please reach out to Mary Tiemann. She's on the call. Hi, Mary. Mary is our...
Yeah. Good morning, everyone.
Mary's our membership director and community affairs representative director. And also on the call is Ava Montoya, who you saw at the very beginning. Ava is our marketing and events manager. So they're our fabulous team, and we do great work together. So we'd love to have you join us. Our cybersecurity peer group is actually a fantastic group. I mean, I should turn that over to Mary, if you'd like to talk about your peer group.
Oh, well, we do have a great group. Our cyber group is very vibrant, and we have programs planned out through spring 2021. Venturias is the chair for this particular peer group, and our members are Tony Corado. He's certainly one of NMTC's ambassadors. Sam Dickey, he is with Tech Systems. Mark Vidal with Risk Sense, and David Kiston with Sandia National Laboratories. If there's anyone on this call that's interested in being a part of this planning group, reach out. We'd love to have you.
We always want to thank our members and our community partners. As you can see, we have many wonderful entities that support us and really across industry sectors. The city of Albuquerque, as Tony mentioned earlier, I'm currently at Fat Pipe, where they can provide a respite for you if you need it to get out of your office every now and then, your home office. And just thank all of our community partners who support our organization and our program of work. We couldn't do it without you. And so please save the date for our Women in Technology peer group that we have monthly. It's a virtual holiday happy hour. Our peer group meetings have been going great, and we're going to have a really neat kind of overview of what the Women in Technology peer group has done this year, and doing a special holiday toast. It'll be a really fun one. So I hope you can join us. Men and women. Men are definitely welcome. It's going to be a fun event. And now I'll turn it back to Ava and to Tony. Thank you again, everybody. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Deb. I guess we'll take it away. Let me start screen sharing here. Sure, we'll do that desktop. And I need to swap screens. There we go. Okay, so thanks again for everybody that turned up, and I'm going to actually switch my sharing because I keep getting the who's here bar, which is probably not terribly useful. And we will share again. This technology is occasionally terribly challenging. How's that look, people? Have I still got the wrong screen being shared?
Yeah.
It's a little small, Tony.
Try that one. Nope.
Oh,
Perfect.
Yeah,
That good?
that's good,
Yay.
Tony. Oops, we lost it.
Back.
Oh, lost it.
Go back to your.
Better?
There you go. Yep.
All right, so just to introduce ourselves, I'm Tony Corado. I do have a role in actually now 2 local startups, doing some vague technology thing or other. I've been involved in cybersecurity for a really long time. And one of the ways I'm involved like that is through the peer group at NMTC. And I would encourage people, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, drop us a note. Brian and I have got our emails up there. You've got Mary's for connecting to the peer group. I'm also pretty active in Open Group and have been involved in their security forum as a steering committee member, and these days an invited expert for a long time. Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. My name is Brian Rashap. I'm a systems theorist by training. I worked at Intel Corporation for about a quarter of a century. I retired almost 2 years ago now. I was the general manager responsible for all of Intel's physical infrastructure in the United States and Canada. And in that role, I was a consumer of many Internet of Things devices for facilities, manufacturing, employee services, cafeterias, environmental controls, and the like. Since leaving Intel, I am pursuing my encore career passion of being a teacher, and I teach a Internet of Things course at CNM, and I will tell you a little bit about that at the end of this presentation.
Thank you, Brian. So it's worth thinking about this as Internet of Things are out there, and they're out there everywhere. So I've got a comment here from Open Group, connections of things that are embedded and connected. Wikipedia offers a view on it, of course, and everybody cites Wikipedia. One of the more interesting things is just how many devices are out there. You can probably pick the number of billions you want to count. But one thing you can say is devices are being added constantly. And an example of this is if you look at a current technology vehicle, it's actually 2 rolling networks, which are interconnected in ways they probably really shouldn't be. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. with a couple of dozen computers in it controlling a lot of devices. And there are many, many other examples. So this is out there. By the way, one thing when you think about Internet of Things security, if you're a longtime cybersecurity person, or even somewhat new to it, one difference is if someone decides they want to poke at your Internet of Things from a I'd like to attack it standpoint, they can actually almost certainly go out and simply buy one of the devices to study it. It's not like you have to break in anywhere. So with that said, Brian?
Yeah, so as Tony and I were putting together this presentation, we kind of did a perusal of the headlines, I'll call it, little news things out there on various websites and various newspaper stuff to just give you a feel for all that's going on. And Tony's point that if you're interested in doing a cyber attack on an IoT device, more often than not, you can go purchase it and deconstruct it and figure out what's going on, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. But you can see here, right? Microsoft catches Russian state hackers. Wi-Fi bugs affect really everything. DVRs and home security systems and baby cams and the Nest thermostat. Just a variety of things that now create all these access points, not only into the devices themselves, but to the networks that they're attached to. And so from a small innocuous device that may be measuring temperature in a water tank, you can get into the enterprise system of a large corporation or a large commercial business. And so we'll, over the next half an hour, 45 minutes or so, we'll share with you some thoughts on that, give you some case studies, and tell you at least what we think are considerations that need to be taken into account as you are either creating IoT devices or deploying IoT devices.
Okay, so what's the problem, broadly stated? Again, connecting lots of devices. And as for those of you who are active in security, probably if you aren't following Bruce Schneier, I would certainly recommend it. We used to talk about things that had computers embedded in them. A more proper way to think about it these days is computers that have things attached to them. And that tends to mean that there are lots of vulnerabilities. The other thing to think about is as these devices get into the wild, as it were, they're there for a very long time. And going back quite a ways, these devices were simply not designed with security in mind. They were designed with functionality, handling low power, low consumption of electricity kind of power, but also low computing power, not so much memory, and so on. So there are many cases simply isn't any security. And the other thing about them is they're often designed, somebody at least thought about the fact that they have to be updated once in a while, but they didn't necessarily think about anything more than if you could locate it, you could update it. So people with, if you will, nefarious intent can find these devices and what attacks are out there. So you may likely enough to already know about Shodan. It builds itself, among other things, as the Internet of Things search engine. You can have a look, you can do searches, and so can anybody else. And as we're going to illustrate in some examples, when someone takes control of an IoT device, you can get bad things. And yeah, there's a little screen clip from Shodan in the slide. So I mentioned vehicles. So most modern vehicles have two networks. There's sort of the infotainment network and vehicle control. They're often, well, they are intended to be separate, but in a lot of cases they aren't. So I've given you some examples, and these slides I think should be available from Mary or Ava, and Brian and my email addresses are also included in the presentation. You can look at those. You can look at an article from guys at Purple Griffin, talk about hacking. And it's not just doing things like turning up the sound on your radio, which can certainly be done, locking it, but you can also affect the actual operation of the vehicle remotely. Medical security. You want a scary thought? Most medical devices, insulin pumps are an example. I spent some time working on heart pacemakers. These things are driven by software. They're typically remotely updated. This means people can get into them and do things like change the operation, or if they have displays, change the displays and measurements. Again, scary stuff. This one's kind of a fun video to watch. If you go look up Department of Energy, or actually Homeland Security's Project of Aurora. This was done in Idaho at the lab there. By simply cycling the speed of operation on a generator. This one is a big diesel generator as opposed to the kind you'd find, say, at a hydro plant, but the principles apply. You can actually make the thing shake itself apart, which is bad. Okay, go to the other end of the spectrum. If you're one of those people that's connecting your home to everything and everything in your home, say a coffee maker, yep, those can be attacked too. You can put up funny displays, you can change how it operates and so on. This is meant simply to be an example of in-home devices. And Brian's going to talk about a couple other examples.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. If it's not bad enough that the individual devices can be attacked and things happen to them, the IoT attacks can also corrupt the entire enterprise network. And here are my two favorite examples. The one on the left, I think probably we've all heard of. Back in 2013, Target, the store, was hacked through their HVAC system, and they stole literally, millions and millions of credit card numbers for customers. It was probably one of the first broadly advertised kind of attacks on people's personal confidential financial information. This network was essentially hacked through the HVAC system, in the sense that the HVAC vendor had ability to remotely monitor and control the heating and cooling systems at all the Target stores. And while the HVAC system, the IoT architects had cordoned off the HVAC system from the payment systems in the enterprise, the facilities folks at Target over time created their hooks into that HVAC system so that they could monitor energy consumption in the stores, monitor temperature in the stores to make a better environment for their customers, cheaper running the stores. And what the hackers were able to do, were able to use credentials through the HVAC system, and then this kind of pipe that was created into the main Target enterprise system to install malware on just a handful, really, of point of sales devices, cash registers, smart cash registers, and this malware started replicating itself, finding its way onto almost every cash register across the whole Target network. And what was happening was, as a customer would come in and stick their credit card in, that malware was siphoning off the credit card information and transporting that offsite to a server where the hackers were, and they were able to collect that data live. And so, something that started with a thing that seems really good to have, which is the ability to remotely monitor and optimize heating and cooling in your stores to make the customer experience better, make the cost of running a store less. This idea that Target employees would want to have access to that information so they could optimize stuff, created a pathway into these point of sales devices. And so again, one of the early kind of really familiar hacks. Probably my favorite one out there is a casino fish tank hack. And I don't know the specific casino, though I'm pretty sure it was one of our not Las Vegas, New Mexico, Las Vegas, Nevada casinos. But essentially, they installed an internet connected fish tank in their lobby, kind of a big, kind of fancy fish tank, and there was some IoT sensors in this fish tank that were automatically regulating the temperature, the salinity, actually even managing the feeding schedules of the fish in there. The fish tank was on its own network. However, despite all of the security measures that the casino had in place, hackers were able to go through the temperature sensor in this water tank, find their way into the casino's database, and were able to transfer 10 gigabytes of customer, essentially gambler data, to their own server in Finland, and then from there, outside of kind of the auspices of the United States, we're able to have kind of free access to all of that casino customer data. So just a simple temperature sensor created this gateway into their database, and they just started siphoning off data really literally over months into Finland, where then they did stuff with it. So really, interesting examples. Probably many of you have heard of similar stuff out there, but again, kind of the key takeaway here is IoT. Tony said that computers now have things hanging off of it, and those things hanging off of it now create a pathway back into our enterprise, and something that we need to be very cautious about. Okay, we're gonna so a few things we conclude about IoT devices. We're still in the kind of wild west of the Internet of Things. While there are some standards out there and some protocols out there, there isn't really any generally accepted practices on when I buy an IoT device. Am I sure that it's secure? Am I sure that it's up to the cyber standards? Am I sure that it's up to the physical standards? You can go on to the shopping website of your choice, and for just a few bucks buy a variety of stuff for your home or your office or your facilities, and you don't really know what you're getting. Most of these devices are designed not with security in mind. Many of them have been out there for a long time and are based on very old and tested software that may have issues with it. Tony alluded to that while in theory the software can be updated, often it's not. And here's an example we threw in there. When was the last time even just your home router that you updated the software on it? I actually can't tell you when I did it in my house. And all of this really increases the surface area of attacks onto your network. And your network can be your house, it can be your business, it can be something even larger than that. And so IoT devices, while they provide really many great enhancements for us, also create this attack surface that we need to be cautious about, is the word I'll use. So Tony, if you want to go to the next slide, we're going to transition now into talking to a little bit about, if you are creating IoT devices or deploying IoT devices, what are things you should think about? What are things that you can do? I'll talk a little bit about things from a device designer perspective, and then I'll hand it back over to Tony, where he'll talk to you a little bit about from the point of view of an IT architect, what you need to think about if you're deploying IoT devices. So kind of building on my last point from a couple slides ago, providing a secure update mechanism is super important. It is impossible to design out all the vulnerabilities. We know that from our enterprise cyber work. An example is end of last year, beginning of this year, there was a set of vulnerabilities collectively known as Ripple 20 that were discovered by an Israeli cyber company. Essentially, the vulnerabilities are in a lightweight TCP/IP stack that was developed in 1997 and has been used because of its portability and the lightweightness of it. It's been used in literally hundreds of millions of IoT devices. This security firm found 19 vulnerabilities, 4 of them pretty significant, that allowed hackers to use the TCP/IP communications libraries built into the device to get into the network. You know, that was sitting out there in the wild for 22 years. And so the ability that once that stuff is found, being able to securely patch and update the 31 billion IoT devices out there is an important part of this. You know, in order to do that, having the ability in a device that's designed to do over-the-air updates is going to be critical, and they need to be secure over-the-air updates. Often devices can get pushed firmware updates, and you don't know where those firmware updates are going to come. So developing a device that can know what network's attached to, know that the updates are coming in and the updates are coming from a reliable source are very important. And there's a little sentence in there about the reboot leaves the system vulnerable and unavailable while applying the updates. It's not the case right now, but a few years ago, the Nest home security systems had a vulnerability in them where you were able to force the Nest system to go into a reboot, which essentially took the home security system offline for about 10 seconds, which allowed people to kind of break into a home in that very tight window. So keeping this in mind, that what happens during an update is incredibly critical, making sure that updates come from a trusted source, that they're not susceptible to the man-in-the-middle attacks, and that the updates are able to happen so that as vulnerabilities come up in this legacy vintage software, they can get patched. Okay, let's go to the next. Don't use weak and default passwords. So I sit in a I've been in a number of corporate environments. I'm in an educational environment right now. There's requirements that I change my enterprise password at higher frequency than I probably want to, that it's not easily guessed words, that they're strong passwords. Unfortunately, many, not only IoT devices, but I would say even just embedded industrial control system devices often come with weak passwords or weak default passwords. I've talked to a number of facilities managers around the country that have done checks of their industrial control system software, and it's surprising how often admin password, username admin, and the password is the default that gets shipped with the device, and it never gets changed. And so if you're creating an IoT device or if you're using an IoT device, make sure that it has passwords that can be changed and that you are changing them to strong passwords to prevent people from literally just walking up and being able to access the devices. Expect insecure ecosystem interfaces. So the IoT device itself is going to be part of a bigger system. As a designer of IoT devices, you can't assume that the person that's going to deploy that is going to take all of the ecosystem actions necessary to make sure it's a secure environment. IoT devices really transmit, tons and tons of data, not only between the device and the gateways, but then with the gateways to the back end and the back end databases to apps. And so you have many, many paths for data handoffs, and each of those handoffs has the ability for a penetration point. And so ensuring that there is encryption in place, ensuring that you're using kind of the most up-to-date stuff at a device level is really critical. And then for those of us that are deploying IoT devices in an enterprise system, kind of going backwards and really thinking about making sure that you have a secure ecosystem that you're deploying your devices in, and that they can take advantage of the security that you have put in place is really critical. If you have an ecosystem where you're encrypting your data back and forth, and there's a device that doesn't use encrypted data communications, then you have just created the weakest link in your network. Okay, next, Tony. Protect against insecure data transfer. So, again, kind of another side to that same coin. When we talk about Internet of Things, we're essentially talking about, smart connected devices, and so the network and the communications is really integral to how the devices work and why we deploy them. The key feature of an IoT device is moving data around and being able to do something with that data. And it really creates the potential for a variety of exploits. The kind of, again, the man in the middle type of exploit is probably a great example of where if you have poor key exchange practices, you can intercept information and learn things about the ecosystem, making sure that you're using secure encryption technologies is very key, particularly if things are running across public networks. And keep in mind that there's data everywhere, and the more IoT devices that you add to your network, the more paths for data that you're creating. And so all those practices that we know are the good practices in in today's enterprise network. Again, just the attack points really are growing exponentially, and so really being very diligent in making sure that data transfer is always secure is quite critical. Next up, Tony.
Ryan?
Yes.
There's a question just seemed pertinent. Any thoughts on how to protect your home network with IoT devices? Same question, but for everyday consumers.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I would say is if you have an IoT device that is not capable of kind of secure connection to your network, you are creating kind of vulnerabilities. Today, most IoT devices have a what do I want to call it? Have an app that will connect it to the network, and you're assuming that the passwords that you have on your network are now going to continue to be secure. But just realize everything that you connect, every app that you use, every time you pass your WPA2 credentials between an IoT device, you are, in theory, allowing someone to have access to that if that IoT device was not well done. I tend to focus on name brand, big companies that I know have other aspects of cybersecurity practices, with the hope, and I'm just going to call it a hope, that they are pushing some of those best practices into their IoT devices. I would be concerned about kind of finding the cheap IoT device, as opposed to finding something that is a little bit more prevalent in the ecosystem, on the hopes that would allow things to happen. Yeah, I see the chat. So use the guest Wi-Fi network at home. I know people that also create a secondary network within their home network, and so they keep all their IoT devices on one network, and they keep their laptop on a secondary network so that they're not overlapping that. I think that's a very good practice.
Let me add a couple other things if I might, Brian.
Yeah.
On your internet access point at home, change the password. Don't leave the default. Remember, anybody can download the manual. It'll have the default password in it. Odds are pretty good that most devices for internet access you have will have a firewall capability. Perhaps turn it on. Another approach is on your home computers, whatever they may be, you should be running, some appropriate security. In many cases, the operating system includes it. Your antivirus software probably does too. Again, turn on a firewall there. So if you've got layered defense, that will help you.
Yeah, and Tony, if I'll add to that, one of the things that I have enabled on my home internet router is I have a phone app that triggers every time a new device is added to my home network.
Yeah,
and
I do
so
exactly the same.
I think that is really important, is to not just let devices get onto your network and assume that the only way they can get onto the network is if you have asked them to. It's quite interesting having a teenage son at home. The things that show up on my network sometimes surprise me, and it's not often that I'll have to text him and say, hey, have you done blah, blah, blah. And so I think that is a really important thing in your home networks these days, is be knowledgeable of what devices are connected.
Now, if that all seems somewhat intimidating to you, your internet provider almost certainly can offer you some help. So give some thought to talking to them. Brian, did you want to finish up this particular slide?
Yeah, let me finish up with this slide. This is probably from the point of view of how a IoT attack may really play out, particularly in an enterprise network, is the lack of physical security of devices. So by their nature, IoT devices are not locked in a computer room, with limited access to it. They're in the space where we live and we work, where we drive, where we play, where we shop. And so they are, readily accessible to people. So not only can you go out and buy stuff, you can usually, walk into some place and have access to a device. The devices tend to, unfortunately, not often securely store data on them. Unfortunately, based on the processing power in many of the IoT devices, they use the old fat file system, which many days is, for many of us is a legacy system. It doesn't inherently allow encryption, and so often the data on the device, which can include your network credentials, is not encrypted and secure. And then, most significantly, one of the best features that have allowed us to create IoT devices is the prevalence of communication from the IoT device to the outside world, and from the IoT device into our network. And so there's numerous types of interfaces that are used to connect sensors, actuators, other types of things to the actual IoT microcontroller. There tends to be a JTAG port for allowing hardware debugging. And just take the JTAG port in particular. If the device is not secure, I break open the case. There's 10 pins that I can go access directly that the manufacturer of the device has put there to allow them to do the firmware programming, to do the debugging. From that port, I get ability to manipulate individual pins on individual components in the device. I get to change the state of the component. I get to alter the firmware on the device. And I often get access to many debugging activities. And so I can take this device, I can open it up, I can use the connections that are there as a convenience that allows that IoT device not only to engage with the world, but for that IoT device to have been created in the first place. And I can go in with the right tools, find passwords, find backdoors, find network credentials. And so physically securing IoT devices, putting them up high in the office space, not putting them on the outside of your building at ground level is really critical in terms of keeping your network secure and not making the IoT device that gateway into your network. Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn stuff back over to Tony. He's going to talk to things from a IT architect point of view, I believe.
Thank you, Brian. So, and keep in mind, with regard to those devices, we mentioned it earlier, this is not necessarily the person in the, the hoodie and dark glasses and all that creeping into your facility late at night to attack a device that they just discovered. They probably bought one, as Brian mentioned, taken it home or to their facility, whatever it may be, and spent as long as they decided they needed to tinker with it. So they're going to walk in knowing how to corrupt the device. Now, what if you're an architect who's either somebody has sprinkled pixie dust on you and you've been made a security architect, or maybe you already are a security architect and the rest of the organization is inflicting IoT devices on you, or you were just hired in, took a look and went, oh my goodness. So one thing I'd start with is take a look at your security architecture. Now, do you have one is a really kind of basic question. If you don't, there are loads of examples. We give some pointers to where you can find some of them in a few slides. I'll mention that our friends at Department of Energy, which Sandia Labs is part of, publish a quite good security architecture, which you can download off the web. You know, your tax dollars doing some good work. In that architecture, do you talk about IoT devices? And if so, how? It's wonderful to complain about suppliers not delivering you secure systems, including IoT devices and their driving software. But did you say anything about that in your architecture? Have you talked to your procurement people? And then if you're developing IoT systems, are you developing internally or with partners? If you are developing, in either case, how do you work with the development teams? I can remember while I was at IBM spending a fair amount of time with a device partner, and much of what I was doing was educating them on what it meant to be secure. So are you doing those things? If not, maybe you should revisit that. What else? Do you have any sense of what's connected to your network? Now, here's the reality. With enough devices out there, you will never be perfect. But remember, trying to be perfect is really the enemy of trying to be as good as you can be. So the best is the enemy of the good. Try and be as good as you can be. But you want to know things like what versions of software they're running. You know, you can still find ancient versions of Windows and running on embedded devices, ancient versions of Linux running on embedded devices. You really want to know what you've got, how old is it, what are the known vulnerabilities, how are you doing updating? Something that's become a much bigger topic in security of late is the notion of zero trust architecture. And the important point there is it's not just at your IT network perimeter. You've probably got a lot of devices if you're doing IoT in many, many cases, whether it's medical devices, energy systems, shopping systems, whatever, out there that are arguably not really inside that perimeter. I did a talk for Experience IT on Zero Trust, which can be downloaded if you want. Lots of material out there. So what we recommend, think about this stuff. Go back and look at your security architecture. Make sure it's current, but make sure that, just having an architectural document sitting in some repository somewhere doesn't get you to being secure. You have to work with development and operations teams. So with that said, we thought for fun we'd include, lots more hacks. And these are a very small number of what's out there. But if you take a picture of a key, you can get a key made. It's kind of not exactly IoT, but it's certainly using IT to provide a physical attack. Turning on, the Dallas sirens, and that was done. A scary one is it's been demonstrated that there are ways into the networks. I mentioned in cars, there is an infotainment network and a control network. You know what? They have those in airplanes too. And sometimes the bridges in between them are not terribly well done. There's an IBM paper on industrial control security. I mentioned Bruce Schneier, who writes newsletters that are really good, and he has some stuff on IoT that I pointed to. We talked about others, but another one is Brian Krebs, has some quite good information. Now, where can you learn more? Lots and lots and lots of material, from publications and standard bodies to vendors. Microsoft, for example, has done a couple things very recently on OT, operational technology security, that are quite good. In fact, one of the authors will be speaking for us in By the way, my dog has an opinion on that, as probably some of you heard. Speaking for us, as will at least one of the Google vendors, and we're working on getting Amazon to come to NMTC as well. But lots of pointers to good information. And with that, Brian, do you want to, oops, that's not what we want. Would you like to have a talk a little bit? If you want to get serious about IoT and you don't know, I'll tell you what, I would sign up for this boot camp and I recommend it. Brian?
Yeah, so I told you at the beginning that I'm fortunate enough to be in my encore career of having a passion for teaching, to be able to do workforce development here at CNM. Many of you may be familiar with CNM Ingenuity's deep dive programs, web design, Android applications, data science, digital media, and our IoT Boot Camp. And so I teach a 10-week intensive Internet of Things training. It's not security focused. And in fact, I have a number of my students and graduates that have joined the call today, and they're probably going to hit me up after here to ask how they now add security to all the things that I've taught them. But we go through the basics of really creating IoT devices. I take individuals with really little to no technical background is required, though if you have experience, that is always a help. And we teach coding, we teach circuit design. We use the Fuse Maker space to do rapid prototyping through 3D modeling and 3D printing, laser cutting, metal and woodwork, welding, variety of other things. And we learn how to create IoT devices using really, there's a number of assignments, but there are 3 big projects. There is a smart household room controller that controls Hue light bulbs and Wemo, which is a Belkin product, smart outlets. And so the students come up with a design of kind of a smart controller for their home. We then transition in the second third of the class into the cloud. They create a smart house plant watering system. I have been really bad over the years of keeping my plants alive. And so the students they use a soil moisture monitor and pumps and relays to automatically water plants when the soil gets too dry. They take environmental conditions from around the plant and are able to send that out to some cloud-based services to be able to remotely view stuff. And then what they're doing this week is they're finalizing their capstone projects. They're going to present to an employer roundtable tomorrow. And just to get you a feel for kind of what they're working on, I have 2 students that are working on a wearable health monitor. So literally in less than 2 weeks, they have really less than 10 days, they've designed a wrist-based monitor that measures blood oxygen level, pulse, temperature, a number of other parameters, displays that to a little screen on the device, sends that to a cloud-based monitoring type tool, has a little button for, I've fallen and I can't get up. We have a student that's working on a drone-delivered rescue beacon. So something that if there's a hiker lost in the mountains and the foothills, send some drones out and drop these beacons and have that lost person kind of come across that and be able to communicate back to the search and rescue team. We have a young lady that's working on a car system that, in addition to being kind of a car alarm system, also has a monitor for the back seat that determines if there's weights on the back seat. So think of the issues that you've heard about where parents unfortunately leave a baby in the back seat and walk away. She has a little alarm on there that says, hey, there's something on the back seat when you lock the doors that could be used for new parents. We have an individual that's created a little kind of mocked up industrial design thing with a hopper and bins for dropping in pellets that maybe then need to get injection molded. And he's created an IoT monitoring of this small industrial thing. And then the last student is working on laser-based communications. So how can 2 IoT devices talk to each other via light? And he's created actually as an add-on to it, has created a smart lock where you can walk up to it and flash a code off your cell phone, and the lock opens up. And so these are the things that the students have been able to create in literally in the last 9.5 weeks, where they knew nothing about IoT. Very few of them knew anything about programming. Almost none of them knew anything about circuits. And so that's available if you guys know anyone that is interested in learning about IoT or just learning about getting into tech. I call them kids, but I've had kids from age 19 up to, I think my oldest student was 67, and everywhere in between. And so really a great opportunity, something I'm blessed to be able to do for the community. There's more information at the link at the bottom of that. But if you're interested in knowing more about IoT and want to get your hands dirty, or if you know someone that wants to get into tech, really a wonderful program to get an introduction.
Thanks, Brian. So we've got some time for questions. I'm going to actually stop sharing. And for those who are interested, please ask us questions. Let's see what we've got in the chat. Okay, and we've had a couple of your students say good things. Okay, there is a question from Mark Reynolds. What scan tools can be used to monitor networks? There are lots of them. Wireshark is one of the go-to tools. But I would say, depending on your home network, Brian mentioned having an app, and I do as well, in terms of, what's on your network, when something is connected. That's a form of monitoring. And then you get into lots of fairly expensive ones. We have a question from Meckenbeer IT. Have a potential commercial application, which means money, for a plant sensor project. Learn more. I'd say Brian would be a really good guy to answer that.
Yeah, my email address is up at the top of that. It's brashap@cnm.edu. Drop me a note, and we can talk more about what the students have done. We actually have a couple versions of it where I didn't talk about it here, but one of the things the students are doing with this plant sensor right now is we're working with Tony's former IBM colleagues. I don't know if you worked with the guys in Canada, but IBM Canada has a philanthropic program where they're helping farmers in Africa use Watson, I guess, to get better decision making around irrigation, and they needed some moisture sensors. So the students have developed a prototype moisture sensor that we hope to deploy in Africa with our IBM partners, using literally what the students created in this class. So excited to hear what your commercial application is, and I like the idea of funding.
Yeah, I think I did work with those guys. I certainly have done some work in Africa. A couple other questions. There was one about having an NG firewall at home, but average consumer. So, there's a point where the average consumer is probably also not a locksmith and doesn't build and repair their own locks either. At some point, I would say talk to your internet provider as a first step. Doesn't hurt to read the manual that they gave you or have online, but that's about where you can go with simple. Then there was a question, can we put in the chat the Sandia Design IoT? I think what you're talking about there was the Department of Energy IT security architecture document. And the simplest thing to do is just do a web search for Department of Energy security architecture. You'll go right to it. Just looking at other questions. I'll put my email address in the chat as well, just in case anybody has a reason to ask questions or whatever. Yeah. And in terms of getting the presentation, Ava or Mary, can you talk to how that can happen?
Yeah, I will send it out as a follow-up to everyone here today so that they can have your slides, which you've already sent me, so I can get those out right away.
Okay, other questions, please either put them in the chat, or I guess you can unmute and just ask.
Mhm.
That's a novel idea.
It's so old tech.
I know. Come on, Mr. Reynolds. I'm trying to share that link. Okay, it was the U.S. Department of Energy Enterprise Architecture.
Yeah, that looks like the right one. It's quite a well done document.
Great. Any other thoughts?
Thank
or
you.
comments?
Thank you.
What is the best way to educate the masses? I'd say there isn't a good way. Otherwise, all of the hacking, phishing, and spear phishing that's out there wouldn't work terribly well. And if there is somebody that comes up with a good way, I recommend you publish. Okay, back to Deborah, you and your team then.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Mary, why don't you close us out if you'd like?
Sure. Well, that was a great presentation and a lot of great information. So thank you very much, Brian and Tony. Our next cyber security peer group will be January 14th, the second Tuesday. Keep that on your calendar, save the date, and our presenter will be Google, and we'll open up that registration within the next couple of weeks. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, thank you guys for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you very much and happy holidays. Everyone, you take care. It's snowing like the dickens here in Albuquerque now. So I think I
I
better,
just realized it was snowing here in Rio Rancho as well.
I better go home and put my sweats on.
Chance to do it.
All right.
Okay. Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.